Well, the drums of war are echoing across the Middle East once again. Skies over Beirut, northern Israel, and deep inside Iran have lit up with missiles and explosions, tearing apart the fragile calm that followed the April 8 ceasefire. Well, what started with a heavy Israeli airstrikes on Beirut's southern suburbs has now turned into direct confrontation between Israel and Iran, with both sides openly hitting each other's territory for the first time since the truce began. According to reports, Iran answered the Beirut bombing by IDF by firing a wave of missiles at northern Israel, calling it a warning and threatening wider attacks if Israel did not back down. Well, in reply, Israel has launched airstrikes on targets in central and western Iran, with explosions reported in Tehran, Isfahan, and other key Iranian cities, even as air raid sirens and missile alerts echoed across the region. Now, beyond the missile barrages, another intriguing behind-the-scenes drama unfolded between the United States and Israel. Trump is said to have warned Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu not to retaliate, warning that another round of strikes could wreck already fragile diplomacy with Tehran. But with missiles crossing borders, airspace shut, and the Gulf suddenly in the firing line, the question now is whether is this just another spike in violence, which we have seen time and again, or the start of a much bigger and dangerous war. So that's why in today's edition of From the News Desk, we will focus on the major developments that have unfolded across the Middle East over the past few hours, and more importantly, what comes next as diplomacy increasingly appears to exist only on paper. Now, the latest spiral began in Beirut's Tahrir district, a stronghold of Hezbollah and a symbol of Iran's influence in Lebanon. On June 7th, Israeli warplanes struck the southern outskirts of Beirut, hitting what Israel described as Hezbollah headquarters and killing and wounding several people in the densely populated area. Now, this attack came despite a ceasefire announced between Israel and Lebanon intended to halt the most intense phase of the war that has raged since February. In fact, Lebanese casualties from months of Israeli strikes have already numbered in hundreds, and Beirut's latest bombing was seen in Tehran as a clear message that Israel did not consider Lebanon covered by the truce plan. In fact, Iranian officials publicly warned that continuing to hit Lebanon's capital crossed all red lines and that any further strikes on Beirut would trigger a direct response. Well, those threats, often dismissed in the past as rhetoric, turned into direct actions within hours. Late Sunday night, Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps announced it had launched a barrage of missiles at Israel, describing the operation as a warning over what it called Israel's siege and bombardment of Lebanon. According to Israeli military statements and regional reports, around 10 to 11 missiles were fired in several waves towards northern Israel, targeting military sites including the Ramat David Air Base. Air raid sirens sounded across northern Israel as air defense batteries engaged the incoming missiles, and early assessments suggested that most of all were intercepted, with no large-scale casualties reported on the ground in Israel. Still, the symbolism was huge. This was the first direct missile attack from Iranian soil on Israel since the April 8 ceasefire, and it signaled Tehran's readiness to hit Israel openly rather than only through allied groups. Now, even as Iran's attack were still being assessed, Donald Trump moved to contain the fallout. As per US media reports, Trump called Netanyahu to advise him not to retaliate, arguing that Iran's strike had not caused major casualties and that diplomacy was close to a deliver in a broader deal. By dawn, it was clear that Netanyahu had chosen the military track over Trump's advice. In the early hours of June 8th, explosions were reported in Tehran, Tabriz, Isfahan, and other locations in Iran as Israeli forces launched what they call strikes on military targets belonging to the Iranian regime in western and central Iran. In fact, Iranian state media and eyewitnesses described blasts near industrial facilities and reported that airspace around Tehran's main international airport was temporarily closed as a precautionary measure. Now, this very direct Israeli attack on Iranian soil marked a clear snub to Trump's call for restraint and confirmed that both sides were now willing to trade blows beyond proxy battlefields. Now, this recent IDF attack also raised another critical question. Did Israeli jets use a northern route through Azerbaijani airspace, or did they operate solely from other corridor? Well, as of now, Azerbaijan has firmly denied allowing its territory to be used for any attack on Iran, calling such claims baseless. But if future evidence proves otherwise, it would underscore the involvement of a third country and risk widening the war beyond Gulf. Now, the military exchanges had immediate effect far beyond Israel and Iran. As missiles flew and radar screens lit up, multiple states across the Middle East either closed or sharply restricted their airspace, including Iraq, Syria, and Jordan. Now, Gulf states once again found themselves under fire. Since early phase of the conflict, Iran has targeted US bases and infrastructure in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, and other Gulf countries with missiles and drones, aiming at airfields and energy assets hosting American forces. In fact, after the latest Israeli strikes on Iran, missile alert sirens reportedly sounded near Prince Sultan Airbase in Saudi Arabia, showing how quickly Gulf territories become part of the retaliation cycle. Saudi officials and other Gulf leaders have repeatedly warned they will not tolerate repeated attacks, but the room for maneuver is limited as long as the US, Iran, Israel triangle remains unstable. Perhaps the clearest sign that this confrontation is no longer confined to Israel and Iran came from Jordan. Missiles believed to have been fired from Iran towards Israel were seen over Amman, with one projectile reportedly intercepted above the capital sky. Well, for the first time since the April ceasefire efforts began, sirens were sounded in Jordan and its capital cities, sending residents scrambling and reinforcing fears that Jordan is being dragged into a conflict it has tried hard to fence off. Now, taken together, direct Israeli strikes on Beirut and then on Iran, Iran's missile warning against Israel, missiles flying over Jordan, Gulf bases under fire, and airspace closure across the region, the pattern looks less like isolated incidents and more like an emerging multi-front war system. Officials in Tehran and Jerusalem still insist they do not want a full-blown war, framing their action as calibrated messaging. But every exchange raises the risk of miscalculation, especially as rumors of routes through places like Azerbaijan and the involvement of US and Gulf assets suggest more players are now in the arena than ever before. For now, the Middle East is holding its breath. The ceasefire that once promised a pause has been broken by direct state-on-state attack. Now, whether this is the start of a new regional war or the peak of a sharp but limited escalation will depend on what Israel and Iran choose to do next, and more importantly, whether outside powers can still pull them back from the edge. And with that, it's a wrap on today's edition of From the News Desk. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm Yash Goyal signing off for Times Now Digital. Until next time, take care and keep watching this space for more such videos.